This is Victoria, BC in 2005. Back when this video was filmed by my father, I was just 2 years old without the slightest clue about anything in the world. Although my family only lived in Victoria for 8 months, the city and province left some sort of nostalgic, fond memories that we can still vividly remember to this day. Since we left, we visited BC a number of times, but this trip in the middle of August, some 16 years later, would be the most complete tour of the area we would do since the very beginning.
We're calling Convoy 3412, is leading 220 for 13,000. Center up to 844 is out of 10.5 for 17,000. Delta 844 out of 10.7 for flight level 240. 1272 switching to the outboard 3412. 2077 Redwood 885. Who was that last one for? 12452 Delta 844. We'll call it number 3412 is leading 220 for 13,000. Center up to 844 is out of 10.5 for 17,000.
British Columbia is arguably the most beautiful province in Canada. Its beauty is due in a large part to the meeting of the mountains with the Pacific Ocean, which, in combination with the area's excessive rainfall, creates some of the most picturesque landscapes in the world. Over the next week, we set out to explore Vancouver Island and some of the mainland to experience some of BC's premier natural wonders. As with many adventures, renting a car was the first thing on our to-do list as we left the airport. This pretty much brand new white Chevy Equinox would do the trick, provided we didn't scratch or dent the thing during our 1,400 kilometer long journey. Driving through the city of Vancouver was exactly what you'd expect. Teslas, Porsches, all kinds of expensive cars, suburban neighborhoods, and of course, gloomy weather typical for the city of rain. For now, we'll have to leave this city behind, but we'll surely revisit in a few days. Our room for the night was located around Victoria, which was still pretty far away, and separated by ocean from Vancouver, so in order to get there, we needed to take a ferry. The ferries in British Columbia are mainly operated by BC Ferries, a massive company which owns and operates a fleet of about 36 vessels and carries around 60,000 passengers a day around the region. Our route today is from the Tsawwassen Terminal, traveling 40 kilometers across the Strait of Georgia to Swartz Bay Terminal on Vancouver Island. This is a pretty high demand route, so ships servicing it tend to be on the larger side. They often have many amenities like game rooms, lounges, restaurants, and a whole lot more. Honestly, this ferry ride felt more like a short cruise than taking public transport, but unfortunately that's also reflected in the ticket price. Stand pretty close to the next person, I think. While the upper decks might be windy and miserably cold on some days, on a good one, the views from here are nothing short of spectacular. As the ferry weaves in between the little fjords and islands, everyone heads up to the top deck to take it all in. From here, you can see marine traffic, other ferries, and hundreds of homes and cottages nestled into the green, mountainous islands carved out by the sea. The next day, we woke up bright and early and headed to a local bike shop to rent our rides for the day. Victoria is a pretty small city, so traversing it by bike is actually one of the best ways to see all that it has to offer. Luckily, the bike shop is located right next to the Galloping Goose, a well-known trail that covers a long stretch between the downtown and more rural areas of Victoria. If Vancouver is the city of rain, then Victoria is without a doubt the city of gardens. Seriously, no matter where you look, you will find some kind of green or colorful bush. Mostly this is due to the mild weather that sticks around here all year long. This lets flowers and plants blossom and preserves them during the winter months when temperatures elsewhere drop below freezing. Victoria has a number of famous botanical gardens, including the Butchart Gardens, Beacon Hill, and Hatley Park, the last of which is on screen right now. Back in the 50s, Hatley Castle was used as a naval training facility for Canadian troops, but was then bought out by Royal Roads University in 1995. Interestingly, the castle served as a venue for numerous movies and television productions, including but not limited to the X-Men series in 2003, and more recently hosted the starting line for Amazing Race Canada's 6th season. Victoria's downtown is small but cozy, which is on par for a city with a population of 100,000. The harbor hosts a vibrant population of dancing tugboats, seaplanes, and other vessels. Oftentimes you can find Canadian Coast Guard ships in the docks, and plenty of smaller ferries and whale-watching zodiacs in the harbor. It's worth mentioning that the bike and pedestrian pathways in the city are well laid out and a pleasure to ride. With the warm climate and excellent infrastructure, it's hard to imagine not cycling as a resident of this city. Seeing how we're on an island close to the Pacific Ocean, the weather in Victoria can be nothing short of unpredictable. Strong sea breezes can litter pockets of bad weather all over the place. We eventually made it out to the Breakwater Lighthouse, where the wind was so strong you could barely stand up straight. Victoria has a huge amount of other attractions, including parks, gardens, Canada's oldest Chinatown, Parliament buildings, and much, much more. For today though, we'll have to say goodbye to Victoria as we watch the sunset from Mount Douglas Park, which offers what can only be described as one massive panorama of this beautiful city. Today, the plan is a 200-kilometer trip northwest through Nanaimo up to Port Alberni, a small fishing town where we'd be staying for the night. The first thing on our list was the Malahat Skywalk. Usually, it's not a great idea to buy tickets for these kind of forest walking experiences, and there are a lot of them around BC, but the Malahat was just open to the public in July of 2021, so being some of the first tourists there, we thought we'd give it a shot. The main attraction of the Skywalk is this massive conical tower which doubles as a spiraling staircase and a slide. The top level does offer some nice vistas, but nothing out of this world. Interestingly, the road we took to get here, the Malahat Highway, was thought to be impossible to build until a local farmer spent 3 years calculating the perfect route alone with a compass, measuring tape, and barometer. The government finally stepped in and used his measurements to lay out a small gravel road in 1911. If Vancouver is the city of rain and Victoria is the city of gardens, then Nanaimo would be the harbor city. Seriously, I'm not making this up. Every city here has a nickname. Nanaimo is a small city, nothing tiny, but even smaller than Victoria, which by global standards is already pretty dang small. It's not hard to see why it's known as the harbor city though. The downtown features many marinas with all kinds of vessels. Some are private sailing yachts, and others can be workboats or even oil spill response boats like we saw out here today. Even BC Ferries sometimes enters the harbor to drop off passengers and cars. Overall, Nanaimo, along with every other town on Vancouver Island, give off a very relaxing atmosphere. People here are focused on taking it easy and enjoying life. Further northwest, along the coast of Vancouver Island, is a small resort town called Qualicum Beach. Even though the climate on the island is far from ideal for swimming and the ocean stays cold all year round, the main attraction of the town is this huge beach facing the Strait of Georgia. Despite the cold water, people from bigger cities like Victoria and Nanaimo come here on weekends to swim, paddleboard, or just stroll alongside the several kilometer-long beach. Before heading into Port Alberni for the night, we had one more stop on our list. Vancouver Island is known for its population of towering red cedars and Douglas firs, and there's no shortage of trails here that showcase the beauty of these trees. One of these famous locations is Cathedral Grove in Macmillan Provincial Park. What was formerly 136 acres of land bought for industry was luckily donated and made into a provincial park in 1944. The forest itself is a magical place to hike. On a clear day, the sun draws all sorts of vivid patterns on the trees, ferns, and vines of the centuries-old forest. The oldest tree here measures 75 meters tall by 3 meters wide and is a staggering 800 years old. That means this tree was already a few hundred years old when Columbus came to America in 1492. On day 4, we headed out early in the morning to drive another 125 kilometers west to one of the smallest but rather infamous towns on Vancouver Island. If you've ever thought about visiting BC, you've probably seen the jaw-dropping aerial views of Tofino. Despite having a population of only 2,000 regular inhabitants, Tofino attracts thousands more tourists with its surfing, beaches, hiking, fishing, whale watching, and overall proximity to nature. The town itself gives off a very modern and bougie vibe. There are lots of nice restaurants and shops, as well as crowds of tourists roaming the area. We decided to take a whale watching tour around the waters of Tofino, and while this type of expedition is not something that we haven't tried before, seeing the ocean and wildlife here would be a first. During our time out on the water, we saw a few marine species, mostly gray whales, but also managed to spot a pod of orcas, which were really hard to film because a thick fog moved in just as we spotted them. We also caught a glimpse of some sea otters and a remote island village across the Tofino harbor. A 10-minute drive from Tofino is the Pacific Rim National Park, which offers long beaches and trails similar to Cathedral Grove but without the giant Douglas firs. Drive another 20 kilometers southeast and you'll find another small surfer town by the name of, sorry, this is really hard to pronounce, Akluelet, I think. It's much less touristy than Tofino, but includes a very beautiful trail called the Lighthouse Loop. This is actually the first location we visited that faces the open Pacific Ocean. Vancouver, Victoria, and Nanaimo are protected by land, so in the event of a tsunami, Tofino and this place would be very vulnerable. This was the furthest from Vancouver that we planned to go, so after our day trip to the Tofino area was over, we made the 2-hour drive back over the mountains into Port Alberni for the night. The next day, the plan was to leave behind the island early in the morning and sail back across the Strait of Georgia to the mainland. If you ever get the chance to visit British Columbia, Vancouver Island is one of those locations you can't miss. The ocean, forests, beaches, and landscapes here are unlike anything else in the world. It's a window into the past that shows just how much nature can thrive when left alone to do its thing. Soon, the Vancouver skyline came into view in the distance as we arrived at Horseshoe Bay Terminal, northwest of the city. The reason we're here and not Tsawwassen Terminal where we started is because of this stretch of road. The Sea to Sky Highway connects Horseshoe Bay and by extension Vancouver, to Squamish, Whistler, and eventually Kamloops on the other side of the Rockies. There's a gondola here named after the highway that takes you up the mountain for an unobstructed view of the inlet. A cabin, trails, ponds, a viewing platform, and even a suspension bridge are located at the top. It's a great location for a day hike and a great first glance at the geography and landscapes of Western British Columbia. Closer to the city, we visited a suspension bridge in Lynn Canyon Park. This isn't the only bridge around the area, but the more famous Capilano suspension bridge requires tickets, while Lynn Canyon is completely free and offers pretty much the same exact views. A neat sign at one of the park entrances lists all the deaths and injuries that occurred here since 1985 and warns visitors about the dangers of cliff jumping. Funnily enough, we saw people attempting jumps into the 30-foot pool later on in that same hike. I think it's fair to say the locals aren't too concerned. The last park of the day was the famous Stanley Park. Located right in the beating heart of Vancouver, it's famous for its trails, views of surrounding Vancouver, and its seawall, which encircles the whole peninsula. Stanley Park seems to be a perfect spot for everyone. Locals love it because of the beaches, trails, and overall separation from the busy industrious city, and tourists love the fact that it's completely free. Even the birds of Vancouver treat Stanley Park as a place to sit in the sun and stretch their wings. During our last full day in BC, the plan was to explore downtown Vancouver and its natural habitat. And by that, I mean on a cloudy, foggy, and rainy day. For the first time since landing here, our surroundings changed from the lush, towering forests of Vancouver Island to the busy, graffitied yet modern streets of Vancouver City. There is a lot to see here, and if it's your first time, it would probably be better to take a few days to properly get a feel for this city. But since we're in a bit of a time crunch, this one day is all we've got. One of the must-see areas here, in my opinion, is the waterfront. Here you can walk along the harbor on the backdrop of tall glass skyscrapers and watch the boats and seaplanes do their dance. Parked in all these marinas is a boat for everyone's tastes. There are fancy yachts, sailboats, and even cute little houseboats parked all over the place. You'll also hear the sound of Harbour Air seaplanes taking off and landing from time to time. The airline was founded back in the 80s and has been an integral part of the landscape here ever since. Harbour Air owns and operates a fleet of 43 small-sized aircraft that uses to transport passengers between Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, Whistler, and so on. Along with BC ferries, the transport infrastructure here is really well developed, and it has to be since there are so many people that live and work in all of these close but separated by ocean communities. Speaking of getting around, another fun way to traverse downtown Vancouver is via the Aquabus, a small, slow ferry that moves people across the False Creek. Using it, we crossed over to another peninsula named Granville Island. What used to be an industrial manufacturing area has now been transformed into a bustling tourism and shopping location. Granville's 275 businesses actually generate upwards of $250 million of revenue in an area the size of a small lake. Overall, it's a cool spot to check out if you have the time, but you could totally skip it because there's not much here other than some cool looking buildings and shopping. As you move further west along the coastline of the city, there are more beaches, parks, and greenery. Although today was probably not the nicest day for the beach, I can imagine people love to sit here by the ocean, catch some sun rays, and maybe do a little fishing on the pier. A familiar sight was this group of kids learning to sail on these little boats called opties, although it looked like some of them had a little trouble getting out onto the water. And a few cargo ships and tankers were calmly floating in the bay. Close to these beaches is also where the UBC, University of British Columbia main campus is located. As you would expect, the buildings here are modern, and because we're in the city of rain, there's some kind of green vegetation everywhere you look. Time flies when you're having fun, and this trip was certainly no exception to this famous saying. It feels like just as quickly as we landed here in BC, we were already on our way back to the departures terminal at the airport. Over 6 days, we saw Vancouver, Victoria, Nanaimo, and a large portion of Vancouver Island. We rode ferries, gondolas, whale-watching boats, and bikes while traveling a distance of 1,400 kilometers around some of the most scenic and breathtaking regions in all of Canada. British Columbia really is a bucket list destination. There's something for everyone here. Ocean, mountains, forests, sprawling cities, it's all here and within a few hours of travel. BC is like Canada's version of California, except with nicer parks, taller trees, and a cooler climate. For most of us who live in flat, boring concrete jungles, BC is a reminder that nature can still amaze and astonish us with its colors, sounds, and sights if we just give it the chance.